reports that we have in Donman that can be quite useful for various organisations, but tend not to be either well known or well used, simply probably because they're not known about those. I'll be looking at a few of those, and then I'll be handing over to Gary, who will look at one or two, plus also be showing you the table reporter, which can be very useful as well. To begin with, I'll be having a first look at code lists. Now, quite often people will ask us, how do I get a list of my donor types, or how do I get a list of my source codes, or something like that? There's a couple of different ways that we can go about that. So if we say just look at the codes that are in the donor record, we can go into housekeeping, and over on the far side we go to donor descriptive codes. Now this is where you actually create or modify the codes that you've got. So for instance, if I go into donor type codes, I have my screen here where I can add or change codes, and from the drop-down list I can see a number of codes that we have on the system already. So you should already know about that. What you may not realize is down the bottom there's this button here that says print codes. Because we're looking at donor type, this will give me a list of donor types. So if I click on that, it would send this normally through to your printer. I have a PDF driver, so it's actually going to output that to my PDF on the screen. So here, very simply, we have a list of the donor types. And you can see there the category or donor type codes with the list that we saw when we looked at the drop-down list. Now, in Donman, about 95% of the things that we call codes are all stored in the codes file, and what we've seen there is just one instance of a particular type of code that's stored in the codes file. Again, if I was to go into, say, mail codes and get a drop-down list there, these are also in the same file, the codes file, and any time that you have one of these screens where you can actually add to or remove or update codes from that codes file, there will be a print codes button down the bottom. So again, I could click on that and print out a list of my mail codes. Now, that's okay if you just want a list of one code. But suppose you've got a new person starting with the organization and you want to be able to show them a list of some of the main codes. You could go in and you could do a list of your donor types, your mail codes, your extra codes, and perhaps some of the other codes that you might want to be able to print. That would be a bit painful if you had to do that on each page. So in this donor descriptive codes menu, the very last option here is the print code list. Okay, so go to continue, and it allows me to say whether I want particular codes to be printed off or whether to print them all. Now, there are many, many different types of codes in Donman system. Some of those you may not actually even be using, but there may still be codes there. So typically you wouldn't normally say no, that you wanted everything. You would say yes, and then you get a pop-up where you can actually specify which code you want to print. So from the list here, I'll take our category code, which is the donor type, this one here. So I'll pop that in the first box and hit enter. Let's do mail code. So that's mail frequency. Oh, mail code there. And let's do extra codes as well. So extra codes. So this should produce me a report of just those codes that fit into those three different types. Now here I can actually say whether I just want the archived codes, the non-archived codes, or all of them, and the same thing for the display. So with codes, when you look at a drop-down list, you're only seeing those that have not been hidden effectively. But if you want to see all of the codes, or just the ones that have been displayed or not displayed, then you have the choice in both of these options here. So for archived codes, I can say I don't want to see the archived ones. They're the ones that you can't use anymore, but are still valid. By default, it says exclude those, so then you only get those ones that are actually still non-archived. But if I go blank on that, then I'll also get those that have been archived. The same sort of thing for the non-display. If I blank that out, then I'll get all codes, whether they're displayed or not. And in this case, I actually have the option of doing a print preview. So rather than it automatically going to the printer, I can actually have it display on the screen. And so there you can see for each of those 3 different types of codes that I've chosen, the codes that have actually come up there. Okay? So again, very useful, especially when you're new to an organization or you've got a new member joining and you want to be able to show them, here are our codes, these are the ones that you want to use. Now, the next one that I'm going to look at is a thing called the general item breakdown by dollar. And in one sense, we can get a list of a breakdown of your donors based on codes that are actually used. So when we look at these category codes here, or donor types, these are the actual ones that are defined to the system that we would classify as valid. However, there may well be donors that have codes that used to be valid, but someone has removed them from the valid list, and so effectively those codes are no longer valid. So what I'm going to do now at this stage is I'm going to go into the reports menu and then into statistical reports, and it's the very first one. It's the general item breakdown by dollar. So I'm going to go into that and run this off. Now, what this will do is it will break down my donor database based on any field that I choose. So in this list of drop-down fields here, I'm going to choose donor type. Now this is, again, is very useful for new people when they join an organization, just to get a bit of a feel for what their donor database is made up of. So in this case, when I do a breakdown based on the donor type, then I'll get a report showing me what donor types are currently being used, how many people are in those, and also to a large extent where my donations are coming from a donor point breakdown point of view. But of course I could choose any field that I like on the donor record to get a breakdown. Now the date that I'm going to use is just today's date, and on the report you'll see 2 date ranges, one for the year up until this date and then one for the complete year prior to that. Okay, I don't care about what the campaigns are, so I'm just going to do a print preview on this. Okay, so this is the report that it produces. Now I've actually did this yesterday, put it into an image file, and I've done some annotations on it, so I'm actually going to swap to that now. So this is the same report that we've just seen, but I've now highlighted a number of things. Now the first thing to note is this column here, this first column, where it's got the code and the description, or that first block, actually is only showing you codes that are actually in use by the system or on some of the donor records. So there may well be some codes that are defined to the system, but if no donor has them, they will not appear on this report. So it's often useful to compare the list of list of codes on this report here with one of those code reports that we've just done before, to compare and see, are there any codes that are defined that are not currently being used. You'll also note that I've highlighted 3 in yellow there that come up as no description. What that means is that the code there, in this case we've got a blank, we've got F, and we've got test. It means that at least one donor has that as the donor type, but that donor type is not defined as a valid code. So effectively we have 3 invalid codes here, and therefore these are things that you might need to check up on. Now I'm going to skip over all the bits in the middle and go to the very last field at the end, and this will actually tell me how many donor records of each of these donor types there are. So for instance, the first one is 2, so it says that I've got 2 donor records where there is no donor type, or the donor type is blank. I've got 41 with a donor type of F, whatever that means, and I've got 1 that's test. So if you were to run this report and get that, you would probably want to check up and see if you can work out what F was, perhaps, and maybe put that back in with the corresponding description. And perhaps for those that are blank, you might try and work out what code they really should have. And maybe for test, you could add that back in, or for the 1, you might simply change that to one of the codes that it should be. Now, looking at the next 2 blocks of data, we're now looking at the last 12 months based on the date that we used, which I had as today's date, and the 12 months immediately prior to that. So effectively, the last 12 months is up until today's date, for 12 months, and the 12 months before that is up until a date, today's date, a year ago. So we're looking at a similar period of time. So when we compare amounts, then we can say, okay, yes, this is interesting, we've gained or we've lost donors. So if we're looking at the total, in fact we're looking at donations, in the previous 12 months we had 1,643 donations. In the last year we only had 1,500. So the number of donations has gone down. But in fact the total amount of money raised went from 917,000 up to 2,000, $2.6, $2.7 million. So there's been a huge increase from one 12-month period to the next. Now you can actually then look at that on a donor type by donor type basis. So we can see that for companies, it's gone from 418,419 up to 1.2 million. So something happened there where the corporate or the companies have given a lot more money. Another one to note here is the estates. In the previous year, there was no money, and then we had $1 million. So that kind of accounts for the difference. If we look at our individuals, the number of donations has gone from 1,525 down to just under 1,300, and the number of the actual dollar amount in this case has gone down a little bit. So it's pretty much steady. Now, looking at the next block, we can look at how many donors on file have given based on when they last gave. So we've got those that are given in the last 12 months. So these would be classified as your current donors. You've got the previous 12 months. So these might be classified as lapsed or perhaps lapsing. And then you've got those that haven't given for more than 2 years. So these would definitely be your lapsed donors. And I've put that down the bottom just to note that. Now, these 903 donors who have given in the last 12 months gave those 1,300 donations. So it's roughly 1.4, 1.5 donations per donor. And that's an easy comparison to make. However, you can't do the same thing for the previous 12 months. Those 676 donors, they gave their last donation in the previous 12 months. So some of those 1,500 donations came from them, but some of them could also have given from these 903 people. It's just that they've also given again this year, so they are listed in this column here. We have the non-donors, so these are people that have never ever given you any money, and finally you've got the total there. So when I go to a client, I want to have a look and see what their database is like. This is the first report that I would run, just to get an idea for what codes are being used, where the money's coming from, are they getting better than the previous year, are they getting worse, what sort of numbers are we looking at. I would typically run this on the mail frequency, the source code, and probably on extra codes as well. Now if I go back and escape from here and run this again on extra codes, you'll notice that there are 8 extra codes that correspond to the actual 8 extra fields, extra code fields on the donor record. But there's also one called extra codes, which represents all of the codes together. And so when I run this, you'll see that the report that I get will not have any totals at the bottom. Okay, so instead of having a row of totals here, it gives you a reason why there are no totals. So in this case, the number of donors would never add up to the number of donors that you've got, because some people have no extra codes, so they wouldn't be included in this report, and some people could have as many as 8, in which case they would be recorded up to 8 times there. So again, it's just a nice way of looking and saying, well, okay, what are the codes that I've got in there that are currently being used? And again, you can compare that to the list of codes that you produce of extra codes, just to see if there are any codes that aren't currently being used. So that's the first report that I'm going to show you. The next report that I'm going to show you also relates to codes. So if I get out of here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the donor descriptive code. So that's housekeeping. Donor descriptive codes. Now there's another menu over on the far side there. In mine it says additional code menu, and in here we've got this thing called the code check report. Now when we ran the report before, now I'm just going to run this as well, there's not a lot of options to it. When I ran the report, and you can still see that to some extent in the background here, you can see I've got those 3 donor type codes that are not actually valid. What this report is doing is going through your donor file, your archive file, prospect, donation. It'll go through campaign files, and as I run through those, you'll see that it's doing that. And what it's doing is it's checking for any of the codes that do not actually exist but are actually being used. So whereas before we found on the donor type, we said there was a blank that was missing, and there was 2 of those. The F donor type, there was 41 of those, and the test, there was 1 of those. So immediately, rather than having to run 3 of those general item breakdown reports or on all sorts of different ones, this has automatically gone through and found we're missing these 3 donor types, but we're also missing 3 source codes. And you can see that there are 267 donors with a donor source code of app, but app is not a valid code. Again, this one has also gone through the archive file and found the same, well, 2 of the same donor types and 3 of the same source codes. So any code that's missing from your donors archive, it'll come up. With archive, there's nothing there, nothing in the prospect file. In the prospect there's an auxiliary code of 0 that's not valid, and there are 2 people with those. It's looked at the donation file, and the letter 0 was missing from 933 donations. In our pledge file, we've got some pledge cancellation codes that are missing from a number of pledge records, and there's a few more of those, and the rest look pretty good. In your function master file, the function status of blank is missing from 3 records. So it's a very simple report. There's no options apart from where you print. It's great to be able to look at that and go, my codes are all good, or oops, I've got a problem here, I need to fix that up. So that's a very worthwhile one to run just from time to time, just to make sure that nothing's gone awry with your codes. Okay, I'm going to look at a couple more of reports. These are in the statistical reports menu again. Now with statistical reports, you'll never ever see a donor name or donor number mentioned. It's purely just about numbers of people like this or number of people like that. The next one we'll have a look at is the count of donations per donor. Okay, so I could be selective by donor type, but I'm not going to. I'll just look at everything overall. My financial year starts in July. I'm not going to use a selection file, so I'm just going to print this off. Now, before I do also, with a lot of these reports, bear in mind that there's a tab delimited file created of different names, depending on the report, that you can then use to import into Excel. That's not on every report, but if it's on it, you can see that down the bottom. So this is based on the year of first donation. So we can see when they first donated, and you can see how many donations people that did give in each of those different start years have currently given. So if we go back to, say, 2008 to 2009, 488 people who first gave in that year have only given once. 19 have given twice, all the way down to 2 people from that year who have actually given over 10 times. As we work our way to more current ones, of course, there's less chance for those people to have given more than once, so of course the percentage that have given the lower numbers will be less. And then finally down the bottom, it says there are 615 donors with no donation count or no first donation date. They would correspond to the 615 donors that have never given. They're your non-donors. Okay. And the last report that I'm going to show at this stage is going to be the segmentation analysis. Okay, so if I put in the date range there, I can put in maybe for the last 2 or 3 years. So if I go 01, maybe 13 through till to today, I can select or exclude by campaigns, but I'm not going to do that. Again, I can select or exclude by donor type. Again, not going to do that. So I've set up some ranges here. up to $10, 10 to 25, 25 to 100. That should actually be 100.00. Okay. Oh, didn't like something there. Okay, I'll make that at the end 99. No, what have I done wrong? Okay, missing, that should be 00 at the end. I thought I'd run this. Okay, let me escape out and I'll run that again. Which one was it? The segmentation. Hopefully my things from before will be still okay. What did I do? 13? No, no. Okay. Okay, well, I guess I probably won't be running this. I ran this one yesterday and it worked perfectly fine. I can't see what I've done wrong. Maybe this, well, let me just get rid of that and run it like that. So we don't need any of those high amounts. Okay, so I accidentally did that to my printer, so we'll actually have a look at that. So what we're looking at here is cumulative Gearframe. So we're looking at how much each donor has given overall, and then we're looking at how many donations it took to get that amount. So in this case, for those people that are given a total of up to basically $10, I've got 27 people, and that's it. No, but they've given one donation to get to that. If we look at, say, $25 to $100, you've got 499 people with that cumulative total that have only given one donation, 86 that have given 2, 59, 39. So there are 12 people where they've taken at least 5 donations just to get up to the $25 to $100 range. Okay. Now, just before I get out of here, in the statistical reports menu, there are a large number of different reports there. The postcode mail response report can be quite useful. If you update your donor mail history and you tell it to update the postcode mail response report, then you are effectively building some statistics that can be used for this postcode mail response report, and that will enable you to see over any period of time and for any campaigns how many donation or how many letters were sent to that particular postcode, how many letters or responses came back, and how much money you got. So you can actually use that then to see which postcodes perhaps are not worth money because you're actually wasting your money, and otherwise which postcodes are very good, where you get a good response and you get a large amount of money from them. While we're in here, just have a quick look at some of these. The statistical reports will only produce small reports as a general rule, and some of these could be quite useful. If you look at your manual, each of these will be shown in a separate section of the manual with a very simple sample, so you can get an idea of what's actually involved. So at this stage, I'm going to hand over to Gary, who's going to now continue the webinar.
Thanks, Murray. Yeah, hi, everybody. So a couple of the reports, as you saw on the menu, there are quite a few reports in the system, and a lot of the details for what the report will show you, as Murray has mentioned, is in the manual. And if by chance in your Donman directory in the manual folder you've got the full manual there, if it is out of date, normally when the newsletter comes out, there would be a link in there that says you can log into the community and you can download the latest manual and save that into your folder. Okay. So the first report I'm going to look at today is called the Table Report Generator, which a lot of people don't know it's there really, because it's like everything, you look at what you look at and the rest of it you sort of skip over. So if we go into the Reports menu and then Table Reports Generator and generate a table report. So a table report is pretty much just like an Excel file where I'm saying I've got 2 fields from a particular file that want to find out what the references are. So I want to find out, how many people based on the donor type came from different source codes, or have got different mail codes, or any of the fields that make up the same one. So I can't cross across two different files, like I can't pick a field from pledge and one from donors, because unfortunately the table report doesn't do that. But so if I go in, and just like the when I do VisRep reports, or if you're still using the old reporter, I can save reports and run them again. This is pretty much the same. So if I've got some saved reports, I can say yes there, and then I can see the different reports that I've saved. So in this case, if I go, I'll just run this one, and then we'll go back and look at some of the options. So if I choose my donor type by source, all of the options that I've already been through aren't showing now, because it's saying, look, I can just run the report. I've already set up what it is I'm trying to break down on. Again, if I do print preview, that'll run through. So this one's really showing me that these are my different business types, or my different donor types for business, church, club or association, individual trust, or whatever codes you might be using. And also down the side, it's now giving me the different donor source codes. So if I go across, I can then see that I've got one business record that came from direct mail, 7 that made in memoriam donations, etc. So based on the source codes that I've put in. Fairly much like the report Murray was showing you before on the general item breakdown, this will also show you codes that perchance no longer show in your list. So if someone has in the past, used some donor codes and you print the report, then this will show you that there are records and how many records, again, meet that criteria. So how many records might have a particular code, where you go into your donor type code or your donor source code and you say, that's strange, that code's not there. If I look at the actual entry screen for the code and the code's still not there, it's not archived, turned off, or anything, it just means there has been at some time records that have utilized that code, but instead of it being cleaned up correctly, someone's just deleted it from the list, but it's still existing on donor records. Normally, to find those sort of faults or things that we find, from doing some of these reports, you can use the filter on the donor screen to go through and say, I'm looking for everyone whose donor source equals this particular code, and it will stop at each record, where we can then have a look and decide what to do about them. If it's a very low number, we might just say, okay, we need to change those 3 or 4 records to one of the codes that are existing, so that we can at least align all the data. Or if we've got quite a few, as Murray said before, you might have to go back and say, okay, what was that code originally, and do we just need to recreate it in the list so that everything links up again? If I were to escape from here now, it doesn't actually exit the program. I can go backwards now through the report and say, okay, based on what I have there, I do want to add a special item. So if I say yes and enter, so you can see these are the fields that are saying that you can add to that particular report. So you can get something like the donation total. So as I said, do you want to, so you've got the option, at the top to show, do you want to show donation totals within a period? Then in this case I might say no, but I do on the report want to show the donation total or the donation count based on my category by source. So if I choose donation total, again I can just enter through. If I wanted to export this into a text file that I can use, like a lot of the other reports, as Murray mentioned, go out to a pretty much a standard tab delimited file, then here I can say yes, and I can then put the name of the file in that I want to create as a text file, and I can then open that in Excel because it's got exactly the same format. It's pretty much rows and columns. In this case, I'm going to say, no, I don't need to do that. I can go through. So if I now go back and do the print preview, okay, so it's showing me the same sort of details, but now I'm also getting the donation total from that group of people. So the business record that came from direct mail, that there was only one, and the total of the donations was $746 from that particular one. So you can sort of get the report to just show you, and a lot of times people are more looking for, how many records intersect, how many people have got this source code that came from, this donor type or mail code or things like that. So I can sort of go through and do any of those. You can do it based on any of the data files in Donman. So you can do it, primarily I'd be probably doing it on donors, pledges, and maybe donations. You know, most of the other things, there are quite a few, like for campaigns, etc., there are quite a few preset reports in the system that are very easy to run to get the details of those. If I exit the program and go in, and this time I'll say, no, I'm not going to use the saved report format or table format. At the top of the screen, you can see here's the data files, and by default it's starting donors, because this is the most common one that people would use this particular report for. But I can choose the donation file, the campaign, memoriam, so basically any of the data files that are in the system I can utilize for this particular report. So if I said I want to choose donation, I haven't got a selection file and I don't want to use a filter in this particular case. From there I choose the item to go across the page and then the one to go down the page. By rule of thumb, if you know that one particular value is going to have more options, then you choose that to go down the page than across, because it's much easier to read a report that goes 2 pages down than it is 2 pages across, because then you have to sort of sit there and stick them together and it becomes a bit messy. So from there I can say I want to select an item to go across the page. So again, any of the fields that come from the donation record I can choose. Yeah, so I wouldn't choose something like the donor number, because that would be a rather horrible sort of report. But I might go through and say, okay, I'm looking for the ledger code, which is the chart account code, or the campaign code, or even a particular batch if I was just trying to get numbers. In this case, I'm going to use the campaign code. It then says, do I want to use specific values? In this case, I'll say, no, I'm not. I'm going to put out everything that I've got. And then to go down the page, I might then use the donation date. If I choose one of the date fields, I then get more options where it now says, do you want to group into month or year ranges? So if I say yes, I then have the option to group into month or year. So if I was just doing a report for a particular campaign and I wanted to get a month-by-month breakdown, then I can do it with this particular report. For this one, because I'm sort of throwing it open to everything, I'm going to say group it by the year. Again, I get the option to choose which month my financial year starts on. So again, if I can choose July or I can choose January, depending on my reporting that I'm trying to do. I also then get the option to go through and say I only want to include these particular dates. So for my report, I'm going to choose everything from the 1st of the 1st, 2010 till today. Okay. I then get an option down the bottom of the screen here that says, do you want a blank or other row for anything that isn't in this range? Again, that would be totally up to you. In this case, I'm going to say, no, I don't want that, because I'm trying to find the values. I'm not trying to find everything outside of that value range. From there, again, I get the option to say, do I want to show a special item? And I also get an option to show percentage figures based on the rows and columns. For this one, I'll keep it simple the first time through. So if I just run it through, go across to print preview, so it'll go through, look at all the transactions in the donation file, and now it's showing me my campaign codes, and I'm getting a year-by-year breakdown. So as you can imagine, I've got some old campaigns in this particular case going back to 98, so there's nothing that's going to be in 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, so nothing in my current ones. So normally I would restrict either the campaigns I'm reporting on, or I would choose something else. So if I go across to general, I can see there have been some general donations in each of the date ranges. So I can see under general, between the 1st of the 1st, 2010, the end of 2010, there's 10 transactions. Okay, 2011, pretty sad year, there's only one. 2012 doesn't show at all. And of course, you won't have figures like this in your data, hopefully, because you don't have whole years of nothing. In our dummy data that Murray and I use for different things, it gets beat up fairly badly by us testing a lot of things. There'll be whole years where you can see in this case there is just no information. But it's more to get the idea of how you can break down on this, because quite often we do get asked, can I do a month-by-month breakdown on a particular report? There are quarterly reports in the system on the campaign reports menu, and that's for all purposes is 4 different periods of time. Whereas this could break down and show me a whole year and give me a month-by-month breakdown on a particular campaign. So if I'd selected that campaign, I could see how many donations. I could also add the amount, so I can get a total of the dollars that have come in for that campaign how many transactions, and do it as a month-by-month basis. So if I just escape or press exit, at this point, it will just take me back to the report where I can go back and say, yes, I want to change some of the options up here. If I just up arrow through the screen again, I can then say yes, and again you can see I've got less items that I can choose in this particular case. So I'm just going to say, yes, I want to add the amount, and yes, I want to add percentage figures. So from there, if we run the same report, so we haven't changed the basic criteria of what we're looking for, it's going to run through. But now you can see I'm also getting percentage figures as well as the amount and the number of transactions. So it's sort of giving me a whole lot more information. And as you can see, very much like an Excel file. So the text file that you would export, you can pretty much open in Excel straight away, and you'll have the data as you want. If you then wanted to do a chart on that, very easy, because you've for all purposes, got that raw data. Okay, so as I go down, you can see I've now got the remainder of my campaigns, because I'm doing it in multiple pages. So as we go down, I can now see that for each of those, I'm getting different sorts of things. I'm getting campaign in memoriam for that year, memberships. So I'm getting the breakdown all the way through. So, fairly useful report. Any of these reports is really just remember that you can't hurt anything, because all you're doing is reading the data. So it's not horrible, and don't be too afraid to run it, because there's nothing you can really injure in that case. One of the other reports that quite often get used is when I do a selection of people, I might want to validate that I've got the right people before I actually do a mail merge or do anything else with them. For that particular report, if we go back to our Start menu and then into Donor Appeals, there's a report here called the Short Summary of Donor Info. That means that when I've created a selection of people based on whatever my criteria might be, like it might be donation total this year greater than $500 or forever $500, I can then use the short summary report to validate I have got the right people. So if I go in and run this one, I get asked what's my selection file. So in this case, I've got one here called 100 plus donors. Okay. So this is everyone in my data file that has given $1,000 or more in total since day dot. So it wouldn't matter if they've given one transaction or multiple transactions, their total is $1,000 or more. If the first time I run it, say I don't want to output an amount for each person, I just want to validate that they are all meeting the criteria of $1,000 or more in total. If I'm printing this report for somebody else, you get the option here to add a heading so that people know what the report was about. And also, do I want to print addresses? Most of the time, you wouldn't be using this to print a list of addresses unless you were sending it to somebody else who needed to know that. Because it's more about, who it is, how much they gave, etc. So if I say no in this case, and then print, and again you've got print preview. Okay. So when it comes up, I can see based here on the number of donations given, and the donation total is the total in this case of the donors from day dot. So I can see that based on this, everyone meets my criteria. So the smallest amount in this case down, all the way up, have all given me a minimum of $1,000 or more. But if I then said, okay, but now I want to see how much they've given me in the last year or 2 years, because over the right-hand side, you can see the last donation amount and the date of the last gift. So obviously there's records in here, like the first one here, that's given me a number of gifts. So they've given 31 donations or gifts in the past, totaling this dollar amount, but the last of those transactions was in 2002. So if I escape from the print preview, use the same selection file, but now say, yes, I want to output an amount based on a total in a period of time, I can now choose a different date range. So if I said 01/01/14 till today, and from this date range, I can also include or exclude a specific campaign or group. So that would normally tie in with what you'd used in your selection file, so what your criteria was for that, you'd put the same things in here because that's really the amount that you're trying to show. So it may be a specific date range or a specific campaign or a campaign group, or you might want to exclude. Down the very bottom of the screen, there's also an option to say you can include donations for a specific ledger code. So if I said I just want to report on, say, general donations or in memoriam or one of those, and there's been multiple campaigns, set up over the years, then I might say, yes, I just want to choose by the ledger code. For this particular report, I'm going to say, no, I'm just looking for the date range. Again, if I enter through, there'll be a fairly marked difference in the results that I see. Okay, so now I can see, even though the records in total have given me $1,000, since the 1st of 2014, there is only one record that has given me a gift in that date range, and that's how it corresponds to the field over the right-hand side here, showing me the date of last gift from the donors. So if I said, I am trying to find donors in my system that have given me a certain dollar amount range, I'm trying to find, some of my top donors or recent donors, etc., I can use the columns that come out here. If I'm doing recent donors or lapsed donors, I can really just look down the last column here, looking at the date of recent gift, or their last gift, sorry, to qualify that I've got the right people, or I can use the fields in the middle here. If I don't choose a date range, it will be the donor's total count, so how many donations they've given me, and the total dollars since day dot. So it wouldn't matter from there. The average donation is worked out pretty much from the fields to the left of that, because obviously I've got an average of nothing. Okay, but it's also showing me that. So depending on which field, as I said, you're choosing when you do the selection file, you can then use this to quantify that you have got the right people by not really looking at the individual names, etc., but looking at either the donation total or even the count of gifts or the date of recent gift to say, yes, I have got the right people before I go forward and start creating my mail merge data file and updating mail history, etc. Because the last thing I want to do is say, oh, look, we've just done all these letters to find out that we've somehow mucked up our criteria and we haven't got the right people. So they were pretty much the two that I was going to sort of run through today. So we'll hand back to Marla and we'll go through any questions that people might have.
Thanks, Gary. A couple of questions have come in, but just a reminder to everyone, if you do have any questions, we ask that you use the question pane in the control panel and type your question in there, and then I can read it out to Gary and Murray to answer. So you just need to open that control panel using the little orange grab tab arrow. So to kick things off, we had one question from Anthea, just on the breakdown reports from Murray, asking, are these 12-month periods to the date of the report or the financial year?
The date of the report.
Right. Okay.
The report does actually ask you for a date, and you can specify the date that you want.
Fantastic. Okay. Also from Anthea, she just questioning if there were any other webcasts that we've covered filters in before. I wasn't sure myself.
It was actually in this current newsletter. There was an article of tips and tricks on it.
Of course.
Plug, plug.
Yeah.
And I think when we did the secrets of the donor screen, we also covered filters.
Ah, that was about a year ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, it would have been.
Okay.
So setting up a filter for the people who don't know is really just like setting the criteria of doing a report. We can choose the field and say, greater than this or equals this to find, some donors that you might be looking for.
Sharon's got a question. She's wondering if you can briefly show how to run a bequest code report.
Okay. Depending on how we want to attack that one. So if I was doing something on particular bequest codes and I then wanted to choose the fields to come out, probably the easiest way to start would be to go into the report writer, so into reports, reporter, and then visual reporter. You may, depending on your system, have the old report writers, And for people who've used them in the past, that's quite fine. But for people who haven't, don't bother. Utilize this particular one. So when they go in, the first thing that comes up, when you run this the first time, you might find that it pops up a wizard. If it does, you can click up the top here to Options and Settings, and you can take the tick out of Run the Wizard at Startup, which means it won't run the wizard automatically when you start up. Apart from that, if I were to go in and say what I'm looking for is in the bequest file, I can then choose how I want to sort my report. Yeah, so in this case, I'll choose donor number. And if I build my criterion and say, okay, in bequest, I'm looking for the bequest code equals, and you'll now see there's a question mark over the right-hand side here. So if I click on there, it will show me the codes that I've got in my bequest system. In this case, I might choose the confirmed one. And down the bottom, I can now pull fields from the bequest record, but I can also get back to the donor record to pull out, names, addresses, or anything like that. So it's fairly easy to set up, and if you got to the point of saying, I've got all the fields I want, but I just want a different bequest code, then next time I can just select that as the criteria, go in and choose a different code. So hopefully that sort of gets you in the right direction.
There is also a bequest report, which is actually the diary report, where you can report on bequesters. That's going to be quite a different report, but it allows you to output quite a lot of information. Are you able to do that, Gary, and show them the diary report?
Yep. Yep.
You can get it from the bequest system as well.
Yeah, so there's a number of places that you'll see. You can go into trusts or bequests or housekeeping and utilize this and volunteers and get the same report. The diary report, for all purposes, is fairly much the everything report. So you can extract just about every detail of donor records. Like if you're going on the road, then you might say, okay, I want all the people that meet this criteria. So in this case, I've got to the report by going through housekeeping, diary report, and up the top you'll see I've got an option to choose on general donors, bequest prospects, trusts or volunteers. If I choose bequest prospects and enter through, I can then choose some of the fields or enter some data that matches the fields that I've got in the bequest record. So I can report on visit dates. So this one I'm going to say, no, I don't care about the visit dates, bequest prospects, etc. But there is a question there that says, do I want to report on bequest codes? So if I say yes, I can then choose the code or codes that I'm looking for to include. If I'm doing visits and I know that I'm going to a particular area, this is where I can then choose a postcode. Or if I've got more than one person who does visits, I can choose a code for myself. If we enter through from there, you can see all the options down here will say, what do you want to show in this particular report? So you can show the full donor screen, their summary history, their full history, the last 10 transactions, any appointments, any functions, all the details from the bequest file, the notepad, and these ones will be irrelevant because they're to do with trusts and volunteers. And down the bottom, I've then got the option to start each donor on a new page. So it really will show you just about everything that you want to know about people. So if I said, yes, I want that, and I want the notes, start each donor on a new page. Okay, so it will come up showing me all of the details from the donor screen. In this case, I'm also seeing the summary history, so the second screen of the donor record. From there, I'm getting additional details that have come from the actual bequest record itself, and then you'll get notes, etc. So that's also enough way to run it, but sometimes people say that's too much information for what I want, but certainly just as easy to run as the other one.
Great, thanks Gary. That seems to be all the questions we have from the audience today, so we might wrap it up there. So thank you Gary and Murray for today's webcast, and thank you everybody for joining us. Our next webcast is scheduled for Tuesday the 19th of May at 2 o'clock, so details will be in your inbox shortly of that webcast. And also, if you missed any of our previous webcasts, you can find recordings of all of our webcasts at the Donman website at donman.net.au. Look under the What's New navigation item. And if you do have any further questions about today's topic, feel free to email us or give us a call. Our email address is info_donman@advsol.com. So that concludes our webcast for today, so thank you all for joining us. Goodbye for now.
Bye.